How's it going, y'all? Today we're going for video number 2 on this channel, and a topic I'm going to talk about today is solitude. Now, I use the term solitude uniquely because a lot of people, when they hear solitude, they think loneliness or alone time. These are two different things. Loneliness is the feeling that you're alone in something. You're one out of a million. You're different than everyone else. You don't feel like you can connect to anyone else. You feel like you're going through something that only you are going through and no one else is going. Or you feel like you're lost without any guidance in the path of life because you only have yourself. That's what loneliness is, and it's got a negative connotation to it. But at the same time, we have the word alone, and that's not necessarily a negative word. When you think about it, people talk about having alone time all the time. Just the fact that you are alone, maybe for a moment, maybe for a time period, is not necessarily negative because it doesn't have the same pang to it as loneliness does. The same ring to it, the same connotation. Loneliness. Now, I don't believe that the two are not mutually exclusive. I think that they can be mutually exclusive. You can be alone and not feel lonely. And you can even feel lonely when you're not alone. You can live a life of being alone and fill your time in your day with productive or creative or spiritual habits and feel fulfilled just out of that. You may keep in touch with people from your childhood or from your work or from school or your family, and you may not really see them, but just the fact that you're keeping in touch with them makes you feel less alone. Or the fact that you feel alone is not so bad if you keep in touch with other people. Meaning you make contact on some level. But loneliness can happen even, they say, when you're in a crowd. When you feel like you have a whole support system around you, and when you feel like there's so many people around you that you can talk to and that you do talk to, and that you do go out with, and that you do share conversations, thoughts, and goals and dreams with. And for some reason you feel that disconnect. You start feeling a disconnect from other people. And you never truly know why. And I think both of these culminate in solitude. Solitude is not a bad thing at all. Solitude is being by yourself and being strong by yourself. Solitude is being alone without loneliness. Solitude is the ability to remain alone without feeling lonely. Solitude is the ability to be productive when no one else is around you. The ability to do great things when no one else is around you. The ability to be a leader. And I think most importantly, it's the ability to be a leader, because a lot of times leaders are alone. They feel alone. And it only makes sense because there's only room for one at the top of the mountain. There's not room for 2 or 3 or 4. There's not room for 5 at the peak of the mountain. Only one person. And that one person is going to have to get used to being by themselves, being by their lonely. We see in the Bible many instances of solitude, many instances of how it can bring someone to God, many instances of how solitude, aka being alone, is not loneliness. We see Moses. Moses spent 40 days, 40 nights on Mount Sinai, and only after this, in his solitude, was he revealed the 10 Commandments by God. Elijah was in a cave for a time, and God revealed himself to Elijah in the cave when Elijah was alone. Jesus himself, familiar that he spent 40 days fasting and being tempted by the devil in the wild. I believe that's Matthew 4:1. Let me check my reference. Matthew 4:1, that's right. And in all three of these instances we see in the Bible, God revealed themselves to these men. God revealed himself to Jesus, Elijah, Moses, even David, spending much of his time alone. God revealed himself to David in the Psalms. But none of these people truly felt lonely because they knew that in their solitude, God was there watching over them, and God did reach out to them. Now, the reason I bring this topic up is because there have been many, many different views in the past 100 or 200 years, past couple centuries, about the idea of being lonely or alone or in solitude. We live in a society today where it's really hard to be alone. It's really hard to be alone whether you like it or not. You go to work, you're surrounded by coworkers, you have to serve customers dozens and dozens of times a day, or make dozens and dozens of phone calls a day, or interact with your subordinates and your superiors. You go to school, you interact with dozens and dozens of classmates a day, other people at your school gym, other people in school clubs, meetings, discussion groups, whatnot. And you really realize that we live in a society where people at all costs cannot be alone. This is something you might just realize if you've gone through this yourself, or if you just have a keen eye to those around you and you're not so inward directed and you're more outward directed. People love to have friend groups nowadays. People need them. They can't exist by themselves. They feel like crap by themselves. Therapists, even priests, will give people advice if you feel lonely to try and join a group or a club or a team. They won't give you advice on how to accept that you're lonely or alone. Right? They won't give you that advice. They will not cure the problem, they will cure the symptom. Loneliness is a symptom of a fact that you are alone. Feeling lonely and feeling lost is a symptom of being alone. Is a symptom of the society that we live in, where people tell you you can't be alone at all costs. Did you know if a woman is to give birth in her 30s, that's considered a geriatric birth, as in a birth of a senile or old age? We have this pressure for a woman to get married and get in relationships from a very young age. We don't want them to be alone at any cost. They're so afraid of being alone, and we're so afraid of being alone as a society. You see people losing their virginities and entering relationships, be it social, sexual, or promiscuous, at younger and younger ages because they hate being alone. I saw an article recently, a very tragic, heartbreaking article in the news about a young boy, 14 years of age, in Florida. And he had fallen in love with an AI girlfriend. As crazy as it sounds, I never thought I'd be reading that in the news. On my 19 years of Earth, I never thought that I'd see something like that in the news. But he fell in love with this AI girlfriend, and when he could no longer access it, or when his parents, I believe his mother and his stepfather, took it away from him, he ended up killing himself because he was so attached to a figment of his imagination, to a computer program, because we live in a society that would rather have people feel accepted and loved, even if it's by a robot, than be alone. This is the extent to which our society hates being alone, hates it. And we have the term social reject or awkward or introverts, which applies to people who are not part of the pack, are not part of the herd, who don't have that support system, who are alone. And when we look at people who are alone, we believe that there's something wrong with them, or that there's a bad reason as to why they're alone, or that has some negative connotation. The famous philosopher Aristotle has a quote, and it's along the lines of, I'm paraphrasing here, whoever delights in being alone is either a wild beast or a god. Now, I know most people that are alone nowadays are obviously not any sort of divine deity, but on the other hand, they're viewed as, according to Aristotle, as a wild beast. Now, what does that mean? You can interpret that as someone who is wild, a wild soul who doesn't need other people, who paves their own road, or you can interpret that as someone who is a wild creature, as in a creature that frightens others. That there's something fundamentally disgusting about that person, so to speak, as if they were a wild beast, an animal, predator. And then we go to the works of Friedrich Nietzsche, and he talks about solitude in a different light too. He actually identifies how people have become so weak to the point where they need other people to feel good about themselves. And it's only very few, the Ubermensch, the overmen, the higher men, who don't need that and who can live their own life on their own terms without the need for belonging to the pack. The weak man, the lower man, he says, delights in comfort and the comfort of being accepted by those around him, but the higher man does not give two F's about that, so to speak. And this is troubling to think about from a Christian perspective, because Nietzsche himself was very anti-Christian, but I think that his works can be applied to the modern day, because when he was alive, it was a norm to accept Christianity and religion and to not question it. And it was the atheists who were considered out of the ordinary. But Nietzsche was trying to make the argument that, among other characteristics, those who did not subscribe to commonplace religion were actually higher human beings. Now we live in a society where the script is flipped, where there's constant attacks on religion, where the separation of church and state, once an innocent idea, has turned into an attack on the church by the state. And we live in an era where most places around the world are in one way or another godless. There is no God. And living on the West Coast and attending, university, you can really witness this godlessness firsthand. And the only form of Christianity that's apparent is nominal Christianity, i.e., people that were raised Catholic or Christian, yet do nothing of the sort to identify themselves with the faith. And I'm not trying to put down anyone, name any names, or act like I'm more pious or better than anyone in terms of faith. But from my experience, more and more nominal Christians, quote unquote Christians, do not attend church, do not pray, do not read the Bible, and do not even know which denomination of Christianity they've been baptized in or their family is a part of. In my opinion, this is terrible, but it just shows how godless our society is now. So with the norm now being godlessness, we can look at Nietzsche's works and flip the script and look at the higher human beings as the ones who are pious, the ones who don't chase worldly pleasures. Because we live in a society where it's harder than ever to deviate from the pack, to leave alone the lazy nights in front of the TV on Netflix and Amazon Prime, where it's harder to leave alone the pornography, where it's harder to leave alone fitting in the pack, fitting in, suppressing what you truly feel is your opinion and your belief in hopes that other people will accept you. We live in a society where it's harder than ever to be yourself, where we have quote unquote political correctness, and anyone who violates this is a bigot, where people are trigger happy to defend opinions that have been cast upon them by media, friends, and family that they've given no thought to, where people are so quick to take sides in a war that is senseless and results in so much death, and from the comfort of their university campus with their all paid tuition and even receiving financial aid, proclaim that one side is justified in taking the lives of the other, when that war affects them in no way whatsoever. But everything that is said on a college campus affects those people dying on the other side of the world. People will want to fit in or be a part of the pack at all costs. Like Nietzsche said, it's only a very few higher men, higher human beings that don't need this, that are clear cut on what their opinions are, that are clear cut on what they believe, that they have a life goal, a life mission, a life project, something more than this world. And when someone who has experienced loneliness for a long time realizes that loneliness is all in here, and being alone is not a curse but a blessing, this is when the sting of loneliness fades away, depression fades away, being bipolar, quote unquote, fades away. That need for other people fades away. And as you find out what you want to do and what you like to do, and you fill your days productively with what you want to do and what you like to do, you will realize it's not so bad being alone, and it's in fact good. For a time, over the past year and a half, I was alone for a long time. And for the first 7 months, a good 7 months of that alone time, I felt lonely. I wondered where my friends had gone. I would take any chance to connect with someone else. I was desperate. I was so lonely that the stress of being lonely forever would make my heart rapidly beat as my thoughts would race in my head, laying on my bed, thumping really fast, like a maraca, back and forth. And slowly they stopped. I found a love for solitude, for prayer, meditation, lifting weights, studying productively, martial arts. Found a love for reading, music, And although I didn't pursue all of these things at once, I found that being alone allowed me the time to explore each and every one of these. And I learned a little bit more about myself. I learned I was a creative person who has musical instincts. I learned I was smarter than I thought. But I also learned that I was not extremely humble. I learned I was not humble, and I did humble myself as well. I learned that I actually preferred being alone, and I should have stopped trying to fight my introversion. Many people will not have the same experience. And when that time had passed and it had been almost a year alone, with no texts on my phone, very few social events or gatherings, and I started to open up again, I started to meet new people, and I started to hang out with new people, and I started to go to events being thrown in various communities. I started realizing that when you're not alone, you have many more commitments that you must honor. You must reply to every text. You must attend every gathering or have an excuse for why you can't each time. You must stay in the know of current events to have something to discuss. And slowly, the time I had delegated to my hobbies, my self-improvement, my prayer, my meditation, my books, my music, faded away. All that time faded away. And then I realized how blessed I really was to have been alone in the first place. And then finally, there was a time after that where I was alone. But I did not have the strength of solitude. And I was perfectly fine with being alone, but I was also perfectly fine with accomplishing nothing with my alone time. And this is a dangerous trap of being alone. Being alone is not a place for you to accept your sins and accept who you are. Being alone is a place for you to develop who you are and develop your relationship with God. And this is something that I've now learned and that everyone must learn. So as Nietzsche said, there will be very few people who ascend to the higher man, who can stand up for their own opinions, who can have their own mission apart from the crowd, who are comfortable being confident and defiant of social standards, even when devoid of that connection to the crowd. And as the Bible said, the Word of God, it was in the loneliest times that Jesus found God. It was in the loneliest of times that Elijah found God, that Moses found God, that David found God, that even Saul found God and became Paul. And as Aristotle once said, that if a man who delights in solitude is not a god, then he's a wild beast. That is also correct. We are the wild beasts. We are the souls, the people that make our own path, the people that have something bigger to look forward to than the comfort of the pack. And every one of us has this capability within us. It's just a matter of time when you realize it. And most people will never realize it. But some will, and to those I wish the best of luck. Adios.